Today we celebrate the feast of one of the apostles, St. Thomas the Apostle. And as is the case for all of the apostles, really, the Gospels don't give us much information about his life. We know from the Gospel today that he was called Didymus, which means twin, but we don't know whose twin he was, whether he was actually a twin or whether that was just a nickname. We don't know much about him besides that. Tradition has it, ancient tradition has it, that by our Lord he was given the task of preaching the gospel as far as India, Pakistan, India, as far as China, some say. Other traditions have it that even reached the New World, that even preached the gospel in the New World. And as Mormon as that sounds, the amazing thing is, if you look at the ancient histories of the peoples of the Americas, the native peoples of the Americas, from Uruguay to Paraguay to Chile to Peru to Mexico, all of them have it in their ancient histories. And the Franciscan missionaries of the 1500s who came, amazed at this as well, all of the native peoples of the Americas have it that hundreds of years before the Spanish arrived, a venerable white man with a staff came and preached to them about one of the gods who became man and was born of a virgin, who suffered at the hands of men, was put to death on a cross, who after 3 days rose from the dead, and who is now in heaven together with his virgin mother. This fact has always baffled historians, old and new, and many answers have been given to this enigma. Well, how is that possible? But that's another sermon that we won't look at today. What we will look at today is the gospel and reflect on it. St. Thomas, he went from the doubting Thomas to the believing Thomas, and as we have said, preached the gospel in distant parts of the world. How far he got could be disputed. That's another sermon. But he went from the disbelieving apostle to the most believing apostle, we could say in some way. Why? Well, let's look at the Gospels. Pope Benedict XVI, back in his day when he was still Pope, left us a few points that will hopefully help us to meditate on the Gospel today. First, Pope Benedict pointed out that the Gospel teaches us that now, after our Lord's resurrection, after his appearance to the apostles, we're able to recognize our Lord by his wounds, even more than by his countenance in a way. We're able to recognize our Lord by the wounds he bears in his hands and his side and his feet, even more than by his own appearance, by his own face. Why is that? The Pope points out that it's because the wounds of our Lord speak to us most eloquently about his identity. He's the God who became man and died for us out of his love for us. He allowed himself to be wounded for us. Secondly, the Pope points out that these wounds fill us with trust, with certainty of forgiveness, and also with faith that our God has conquered death. He bears his wounds, but now in his glorious and resurrected body. Thirdly, this gospel teaches us what a responsibility we have towards our Lord. We have a responsibility to love him back. Our Lord shows us his wounds, the love he showed us, the passion he underwent for us, the sufferings he underwent for us. And this is for us a responsibility to let ourselves be wounded for love of him, the Pope says. To let ourselves be wounded for love of him, to love God even when it hurts, to love God even when this means suffering. Lastly, to sum everything up, this gospel, the Feast of St. Thomas, teaches us that following our Lord entails some difficulty. Following our Lord entails embracing the cross. Following our Lord entails suffering for our Lord. Intellectually, it entails a seeking of an understanding of the faith. So we shouldn't imitate St. Thomas in his doubt. Doubt means we suspend judgment. We say, well, I don't know whether to believe or not to believe. I'm just going to be in a kind of a limbo until I have certain evidence. No, on the authority of God, we know that revelation comes from God, and on God's authority, who rose from the dead to prove that it was God who revealed the gospel, on God's authority, we can and have to believe, but that doesn't dispense us of an intellectual inquiry into the motives of our faith. That doesn't dispense us from trying to delve into the faith as far as possible with our own reason, to have a rational understanding of our faith. This we have to do. This we have to, in a way, learn from St. Thomas. Seek until we find a sufficient understanding of the faith so that we're convinced and we're able to convince others. Because a confused mind is a devil's playground, and many Catholics fall away because they're confused. They don't know their faith. And we're not able to bring other Catholics fallen away or Protestants back into the church because we don't know the faith enough. We don't know the reasons of our faith. So we have to perseveringly seek a sufficient intellectual understanding of our faith. And then we have to be ready to die to self, which is painful. Dying to self is painful, but our Lord loved us painfully, even to the point of laying down his life for us. So may St. Thomas the Apostle teach us that true mature faith, which doesn't doubt, but seeks an understanding. And once it understands, it puts into practice what it understands, and it is willing to lay down its life for the faith it has received. Praised be Jesus and Mary.